And I know why you guys are here. You just want to know whether the Lightcones are worth it and which one of them do I think is worth picking up as well. Now, I won't waste your time to having to skip around, so I'll just put it in the front. And if you're still sitting on the fence, I'll give you some additional thoughts towards the end as well. But remember, I'm not encouraging anyone to spend money if you can't afford it or you don't have the means to. Spend what you want to as well, and if you want to be free to play, I strongly encourage that, as you know, on this channel we already cover a lot of content with free to play based units as well. But that disclaimer aside, now let's go in terms of which Lightcones do I think is much better. And I do have a few that I want to talk about, but first let's talk about one that probably most people will be looking at, is this Harmony Lightcone here. Carve the moon and weave the clouds. Tingyun's design in terms of the Harmony Lightcone. Now, my biggest gripe right with this Lightcone, it gives very good amounts of supportive ability, but it's very RNG based. And this RNG is not even universally favorable, especially if you get the ones that buff crit damage. Your supports in the team don't really benefit from crit damage because they won't be building a lot of crit damage. What this means is you already have some sort of like inefficiencies in this passive ability already. And sure, while energy recharge and attack is very nice in terms of the universal buffs, I do want to bring your attention to this other Lightcone that is available basically as a normal 4-star from the Stellar Warp that you can get as well. And this is the one I'm talking about, Dance Dance Dance, a Harmony Lightcone that we can get. I have it here at Super Imposition 2. I think it was 16% action advance at Super Imposition 1. And this is way better because it's super universal. Whenever you cast an ultimate ability, all your allies' action advance are by 16%. This is like anyone is able to use this ability, maybe with the exception on a character like Clara might not be able to use this as well as she's more focused on counters, but by and large a lot of other characters definitely would favor this, and both Tingyun, Asta, and even Bronya as well does tend to use it quite often. And in my opinion, I do think that this is a superior Lightcone to have as well. If you have two, you can even use one in each half of the Memory of Chaos, and I think that this Dance 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 is nothing to scoff about. And even if you don't want to use the Dance Dance Dance, this other Lightcone, for example, Chorus here, a 3-star Lightcone, also gives the 12% attack buff that one of the stats of, for example, that Tingyun Lightcone we saw from the Battle Pass earlier is only like 10% at the first Super Imposition level. So this Chorus definitely is way better in terms of giving like universal buffs that is also unconditional without the element of RNG. Of course, you do lose out a little bit in terms of like the 4-star stat scaling, but you don't even have to buy a Battle Pass to get this one, and that's something that is worth considering. So those are my thoughts in terms of like the Tingyun Lightcone. Now let's go up the order and let's talk about this Return to Darkness, the Hunt Lightcone that we have in the Battle Pass. Now this is a pretty strong Lightcone because it increases the wearer's crit rate by 12%, and after a crit hit there is a 16% chance to dispel a buff on the enemy target as well, making your Hunt DPS also able to at least have some utility in terms of cleansing the enemy as well, really utilizing like this crit stat. In a sense, if you are running, for example, Danheng as more of like a supportive unit just meant to slow the enemy, I do think that this is actually a pretty decent alternative, especially if you want to put your main Lightcones on your main damage dealers. Although it can only trigger 1 time per attack, I think it's pretty solid as well. Especially if each attack that you take, you are able to have a chance to dispel a buff on the target. Pretty useful as well. But I think when we are talking about this Lightcone, there's something that we must remember, and that is the Herta shop. So as of time of recording, now it's like the 30th of April, so I'm not sure whether the shop resets, but I don't think it really resets in terms of like changing the order of what is appearing in the shop. If it does and you're viewing this like in May and forward, just take note of what I'm saying is based on the perspective that we have never had a new month yet, so I'm just making some inference and based on my own judgment as well. But I think that one of the important things to note is that there's this 5-star Lightcone in terms of the Hunt in the Herta store, which you can get for free. As long as you go and clear enough of the worlds, you can get these Herta bonds. I think once you clear up to World 4, you will be able to get your first Lightcone as well. And once you purchase this gives you like already 8% crit rate on level 1, and you already have it in terms of a 5-star stats scaling as well. It gives you overall much better stats in terms of the overall distribution because it's a 5-star Lightcone. And of course, you are able to eventually get this up to Super Imposition 5, as you can just buy this Super Imposer custom made here. I already do more guides in terms of this shop. If you're interested, you can check out the shop guide on the channel. But basically, all of us will be able to get this free to play at Super Imposition 5, which I recommend you putting on like your 5-star damage dealer. And not only that, in terms of like the Return to Darkness, it also competes with quite a lot of other 4-star Lightcones that are pretty decent as well. Now let me show you. So before I shifted to this cruising in the Stellar Sea 5-star Lightcone, I was actually using this Only Silence Remains Lightcone for the longest period of time, and it gives a good amount of attack, and if there are 2 or fewer units on the field, crit rate is increased by a very substantial amount as well. Of course at Superimposition 1 is slightly less, but I think that this is a pretty solid Lightcone already, and a lot of good competition already exists for the Lightcone that we see in the Battle Pass as well. So that's like something to consider. There are many other options available too. Okay, and next up we have This Is Me, a Preservation Lightcone that is from the Battle Pass as well. What this Preservation Lightcone does, it increases the defense of the character that is wielding it by 16% and increases the damage of the wearer when they use their ultimate ability based on their defense. This is pretty strong, especially if you're a character, for example, like March 7 or maybe Fire MC, who wants to utilize their defensive stat a little bit more. This kind of shifts like your defender into a more offensive role. I think it's very strong, especially if you're running a double preservation unit kind of role, or you don't really need the damage reduction, perhaps because for example you're running Clara and maybe March 7 in the same team. Then this is very effective in bringing out more offensive kit for March 7, because Clara is going to be soaking all the damage and she already has so much damage reduction built into a kit, and you don't really require, for example, this Lightcone here, this day 1 of my new life here. I think this is a very solid preservation Lightcone for more defensive preservation class units, whereas the one in Lightcone changes the playstyle up a bit and allows more offensive play. If you are March 7 main, this is definitely one to consider about as well. Even the 5-star Lightcone that is in the Herta shop doesn't give you that offensive ability that we see over here as well. Next up, we will meet again a NIHILITY Lightcone. This is very easy to proc in terms of the passive. Whenever the wearer uses a basic attack or skill, basically you will deal additional damage equivalent to almost 50% of the wearer's attack to the a random enemy that has been attacked using like this basic attack or skill. This is very useful because it's like basically free damage, and a lot of NIHILITY characters, if you've realized, like Pella, eventually Silverwolf, Sampo, eventually Kafka as well, a lot of these NIHILITY class characters actually do significant amount of damage and skills quite well with attack as well. Very solid, very general. Okay, so let's take a real quick look at the other like 4-star Lightcones that are available. And the quick thing that we see, for example, let's look at this Eye of Prey here. It increases effect hit rate 20% and increased DOT damage. This is a bit more specific. Not every NIHILITY character has DOT. For example, Pella doesn't have this DOT as well. And if we look at, for example, Fermata, this other 4-star Lightcone, it increases break damage dealt by the wearer, and also when the enemy has this shock or wind shear, it increases a certain amount of multiplier as well. Not all NIHILITY characters again have shock or wind shear, especially those with like, for example, maybe Burn or even Pella with ice damage. So that's something to consider as well. Not as generalistic as the one that we saw in the Battle Pass. And of course, the last 2 Lightcones which are competitive against the one that is from the Battle Pass, the Nameless Glory Battle Pass, is definitely one like Resolution Shines as Pearls of Sweat. And when the wearer hits an enemy, and if the hit target doesn't already have this debuff, they have a chance of adding a defense break, giving any NIHILITY class character the option of giving a very small but still good amounts of defense break on the enemy target. This is pretty general, and this is something that you want to consider, especially if you are perhaps wanting to have more damage utility coming out from the rest of the team as well. But of course, you could run each one in one side and the other one in the other side. I think that is pretty decent too. The last one that is also, I would say, more similar in terms of the role of the Lightcone will be Good Night and Sleep Well. For every debuff the enemy target has, the damage dealt of the wearer is increased by 15%, stacking up to 3 times. That's a 45% damage increase as well. And generally, NIHILITY class characters do stack up quite a bit of debuff, but if you perhaps are only really like Pella running maybe 1 or 2 types of debuff, you might not be able to get the entire amounts of debuff. And if you're hitting like AoE, definitely this one will have a lot of value. Whereas the Lightcone that we see in the Battle Pass, we will meet again, is definitely more like specialized in more single target damage, especially if there's only one boss unit left on the field. This definitely does make up in the difference. Is it worth it or is it not? I do think there are plenty of options available too, so it's really depending on your choice as well, on what your team composition really requires. For me, I think the other 4-star Lightcones are still better, especially because I use Pella mostly as my NIHILITY damage dealer. Abundance is a very tricky one because it may seem quite decent on the surface here because it gives a general 0 heal, but note that this is only 2% of their respective max HP. At around, I think, 2000 in terms of HP currently at what we are seeing, that's about 40 HP recovery when she uses a normal attack, or any character uses a normal attack or healing. That is not very significant, and in my opinion, I think there are other better 4-star Lightcones, for example, the ones that we have right here. Like Post-Op Conversation gives a straight up energy restoration rate increase, and of course you also get increased outgoing healing when they use their ultimate. Much more generalistic and much better than that small instance of heal that you get in terms of like team-wide healing. Of course this is only for ultimate, but when you use a character, for example like Natasha, you do want to focus down a lot in terms of the ultimate burst heal. Of course, if you are playing a character like Luota in the future when he is released, he might not be healing in his ultimate, so that is just like some things to note as well, planning for the future as well. And I think the last Lightcone I want to talk about in terms of like 4-star for the abundance is this Shed Feeding Lightcone, which I currently do not have. So I'm actually in the data bank to actually take a look, and you guys can actually come to the data bank as well to take a look at like the Lightcones effect, and you can do like a quick comparison between the Lightcones as well. So in terms of this Shed Feeding, I think this is probably one of the stronger ones, and it increases your wearer's outgoing healing straight up by 10%. Very generalistic in terms of being a healer's Lightcone, and when you use a skill, you regenerate 2 energy for all allies. In my opinion, this is probably like the best in slot Lightcone for abundance characters. If you want to just slap it on any healer, this is probably the best one to get, and I would strongly recommend you pick up, if you can, Shed Feeling, much better over like the Lightcone in the battle pass as well. Those are my honest thoughts. I don't have this, and I really want this as well for my account. Nowhere to Run, a Destruction Lightcone, which increases the wearer's attack by 20% generally, and when the wearer defeats an enemy, you get a bit of HP restore. So this is something like a pseudo lifesteal, especially when you're fighting more AoE content. It does help, especially if you're playing, for example, a character like Ireland or eventually Blade when he's released, who does like to manipulate their HP bar. This additional HP restore could help them help sustain a little bit more as well, especially if you are in a map with quite a few amounts of squishies. Against bosses though, this doesn't really affect. And of course, well, one thing to note is there is a Destruction Lightcone in the Herta shop that I want to point out as well. So if you go into the Herta shop right here, you look at the On the Fall of Aeon. This is a Destruction Lightcone that is 5-star, and we always want to compare the 5-star Lightcone that is free because it's directly competing in terms of taking our attention away as well. And this also very similarly has a when the wearer attacks, increase attack by 8%, and when the wearer inflicts a weakness break, it increases the wearer's damage even more. This is in a sense like more general because every boss enemy tends to have weakness breaking. That's why you will bring that particular character to fight the boss. So it's much more easier to proc this effect than say if you're fighting a boss that has no minions entirely, like maybe for example one of the Kafka bosses and stuff like that. They might not summon minions, so you don't really get that lifesteal, and it's hard to guarantee that you can get that lifesteal off as well. So I think that this On the Fall of Aeon would probably rank the same in terms of competitiveness in terms of the other Lightcone as well. And generally, destruction characters are DPS characters in nature, so they compete alongside with classes, for example, the Hunt in single target damage, as well as Erudition characters in AoE damage. And there are other Lightcones available in terms of the other two, so it's generally quite broad. In my opinion, I don't think Nowhere to Run is super attractive, especially because of what we see in the 5-star Herta shop as well. If you're running maybe one destruction character in each side, you could consider picking it up, but for the most part, especially if you're a Clara user, you definitely want to consider picking up the 5-star Lightcone of Clara's signature in the Lightcone shop itself. Signatures generally for all standard 5 stars are much better for the particular character, especially if you can save up like the 600 expensive glitter that we have in the shop as well to exchange for it. I think those are much better than anything we will find in terms of like their specific standard 5-star Lightcone for that particular character. And of course, I saved the best for last, Erudition. Today is another peaceful day. It's something that I think is possibly my favorite out of all of them. And the reason because the competition is much less in terms of for this Lightcone. So after entering the battle, increases the wearer's damage based on their max energy. Damage increases by 0.2 per point of energy up to 160 energy. So let's just take like the average of 100 energy a character might have, which is on the low side already. That is already a 20% damage increase per point of energy a character has thereabouts on average. So now let's look at like the other 4-star Lightcones as like competition comparison. Okay, so there are generally 4 other Lightcones in terms of Erudition Lightcones that we have in comparison. I think the strongest competitor out of all of them will be the Seriousness of Breakfast, where it increases the wearer's damage by 12%, and for every defeated enemy, you get a bit of increase. Notice that this 12% that we have over here is already much less than if your character had about 60 energy in terms of the amount of gauge that they have. It will probably break even already by then. So if you have a character playing on their ultimate burst ability and does want to get a lot of regen up, and maybe you build energy restoration in a kit or have other supply of energy restoration, I would say the Lightcone in the battle pass is definitely very valuable. This one, the break even is like 60 energy, which is quite low to meet, in fact, in my opinion, and this is probably one of the more general out of the 4 of them already. And we can look at the Servile Lightcone here, Make the World Clamor. Although you get energy immediately, but it was only once you enter the battle, and it straight up flats up increase the ultimate damage, but especially if you are doing damage from your normal attacks and skill as well, in terms of splitting up, you do lose quite a bit if you're not bursting on every single rotation. The question remains is, which Lightcone am I going to pick? I think personally, out of all of them, the most attractive one for me will be a one like this ERUDITION one. I think this Lightcone is just much better in terms of versus the competition, and there's a lot of ERUDITION characters are pretty good in the game as well. You want to have a decent Lightcone that is able to scale across most ERUDITION characters that do damage through their burst, or maybe perhaps they have a good amounts of energy restoration and want to use their ultimate ability quite a lot. I think it's a really solid Lightcone to have. This is personally my recommended, but I've already talked about the other ones already, so I just picked it up just to show you that I'm committed to what I'm saying as well, and I don't just recommend things just for the sake of. So at this point, I guess to answer the opening question, is the battle pass worth it? I think the biggest comparison, if you're willing to spend the money, is between the battle pass as well as the monthly gems. And long story short, the monthly, if you just want to pull characters and you don't plan on like getting resources through like refreshing, definitely this is not as worth it as the monthly pass in terms of the premium gems that we can get per month. But this is very worth it, for example, if you are wanting to clear content quicker and you want to build more characters, because you don't just want to pull the characters, you want to be able to play them faster. And if you're a person who doesn't mind spending maybe I think $10 US to get the base pass, you can actually pick up quite a lot of resources here, as you can see, in terms of leveling up characters faster. Especially for me, like as a content creator, it's very useful for me to gear up more characters to do videos and build guide videos for you guys as well. Not to mention, it also helps a lot in terms of like resource where you can choose exactly what you want, which further reduces the strain on the amount of energy that you feel. Of course, if you are free to play or maybe you are a super small spender, this is not worth it, because all these additional resources technically can be gotten with time, and it's really only the battle pass Lightcones that are really the factor that you should be thinking about. And as you have seen from my comparison, there are other competition in terms of Lightcones, and a lot of standard 5-star Lightcones do be much better for the particular character as well. They are nice to have, they are definitely an upgrade above other 4-star Lightcones, as we have talked about already, but I don't think overall, if you are not a person that cares too much about resources, building new characters quickly and clearing content earlier, I think you should just wait it out. The normal one is good enough, in my opinion, especially if you don't want to force yourself to spend money as well. But those are my honest thoughts. And of course, last but not least, do I think that the Nameless medal is worth it? Definitely not. Never get this. This is absolute waste of money. For me, I only got it because I wanted to get to this point faster so I can make content for you guys as well. These, if you are into cosmetics, this is not even a cosmetic, it's like a badge change. I don't even use it. I use the teddy bear because it's a lot cuter and more friendly as well. No one wants to show off that they are a whale to people, right? For no reason. It just seems so arrogant. And last but not least, of course, they give fuel, which I need as well. And do like and subscribe if you found this video helpful. It's not very easy to make a pay to win guide because there's not many target audience as well in terms of paying money for the game, and I just want to try to do my best as a free to play content creator to be as free to play friendly as well. Hope this helps, and do check out these 2 other videos right here I have for you, and see you in the next video.